And I think their view is that it's an involvement device. It's something you might pick up on a shelf and decide to look at, and maybe that would cause you to buy the book. I'm a little uncomfortable with it because I think I've tried in the book to give a whole sense of a tradition, as I say, running back to the Greeks and the early Israelites, running through the Renaissance, the American Revolution, through great 20th century thinkers like Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich Hayek and Milton Friedman, and I think it's awfully simplistic to try to sum it up in 20 questions.
So you're not real happy with this?
It's not my favorite part of the book.
Well, in the you say you're supposed to take the quiz and you apply, give yourself 10 points if you think you decide that you just 5 points if you're not sure. Anyway, you say who should decide whether or not you wear a seatbelt, own a gun, serve in the military, smoke marijuana, use a risky medical treatment, engage in a homosexual relationship, buy a pornographic video, buy a sexist book, send your child to a particular school, have uncensored access to the internet.
Well, each one of those, I think, does make a libertarian point. The question is not whether these are good things to do. There are a lot of the things on that list that I don't want to do that I wouldn't really want my friends to do. The question is, who should make the decision? If you're an adult, should you make the decision whether to wear a seatbelt or use an untested medical treatment, or should the government make that decision for you? And the libertarian answer is that individuals, adult individuals, should be able to make those decisions for themselves.
What's your favorite thing that's libertarian?
The wonderful modern society we live in.
The society's libertarian?
Sure. It's not quite as libertarian as I would like, but the modern world, since the American Revolution and since Adam Smith sort of summed up the notion of spontaneous order and free markets, the modern world is built on the ideas of John Locke and Adam Smith. We do have a society in which people are largely free to make their own decisions, in which free markets have created tremendous prosperity. I'm sure you have people on your shows every day complaining that some people are poor, that we can't get certain things, that health care is not good enough, that all kinds of problems with the economy. But if you look at it in historical perspective, for tens of thousands of years, people were desperately poor. They suffered back-breaking labor. And about 250 years ago, we had the Industrial Revolution. We started having free markets. Karl Marx called it capitalism because he thought capital was the point, but that's not the point. The point is people working freely, allowed to trade and exchange, and they created this tremendous wealth so that we can sit here in this television studio and you're going to film this and be able to broadcast it nationally, internationally. Millions of people are going to be able to watch this. You put some of this information on an internet site and people can access it any time of the day. Tremendous advances in society and the economy, and that's because we've had a relatively libertarian society. So I guess what I like best about libertarianism is the fact that I can live here at the end of the 20th century and have unprecedented access to ideas and music and goods and travel and all those things that make life really worth living.
Legalize drugs?
Well, that's another little aspect of it. Yes, I think that adults should be able to make decisions about what they put in their own body. And it's interesting you say legalize drugs, and you didn't say whether you meant pharmaceutical or recreational, but I think the rule applies either way. If I wanted to use marijuana or cocaine, I don't think it's Bill Clinton's decision whether I should do that. Similarly, if I have a disease and my doctor recommends a drug, but the FDA hasn't approved it, I think I should be able to use it without a bureaucrat's permission.
Same-sex marriages.
I think that if the government is going to recognize marriage, then it should do so on an equal basis. And if two people love each other, two adult individuals, then it is good for them to be able to make a committed relationship.
Peace. The word peace comes up in your books here.
I like peace.
But what about military and peace and all that? What's the libertarian view of that?
We need a government to protect our rights. We need a government to protect us from people who might hurt us on our own streets. That's why we have police. We have courts to settle disputes, and we need a national defense to protect us from people who might hurt us overseas. But if you look at the history of the world, there have been so many instances of governments getting into wars to aggrandize themselves, to gain land, to gain power. It used to be that kings would say, I did it to get better known. Fortunately, the liberal, libertarian impulse in modern life has been so strong that a king can't say that anymore. But we still have too many countries getting into unnecessary wars, sending off kids to die. exploiting the society, seizing money to be spent on military expenditures. We need a strong national defense. We need to be secure from our enemies. But in the present context, I don't think that means that we need American boys in Somalia and Bosnia and all the other places around the world that our government seems determined to meddle.
1.5 million men and women under or in uniform today in the United States. How big an Army, Navy, and Air Force would you keep?
Well, that's a prudential thing. I don't think it follows directly from libertarian theory or anything, but my colleagues at the Cato Institute who study military and defense matters say that we would be perfectly well protected with an army of about 1 million people, Army, Navy, Marine Corps, etc.
On page 279 of your primer, you say that most of our political leaders are still living in Washington that Roosevelt built, the Washington where if you think of a good idea, you would create a government program. Consider a few examples, and you start right off by saying, Senator Bob Dole reads the First Amendment.
The 10th Amendment.
I'm sorry, thank you. The 10th Amendment and on the campaign trail, but introduces bills to federalize criminal law, welfare policy, and the definition of marriage. Bob Dole's not your candidate.
Bob Dole's not my candidate. I think that's a problem with people who talk about the 10th Amendment. There's a lot of talk about the 10th Amendment protecting the rights of states and the people and limiting the powers of the federal government. It absolutely does. But politicians who talk about that, nevertheless, when a popular issue comes up, they pass a federal crime bill. I don't think there's any authority in the Constitution for the federal government to be setting up most things as federal crimes. They pass a bill to make church burning a federal crime. Church burning is a terrible thing, which is why it's illegal in every one of the 50 states. You don't need a federal law about that.
Your second one is Vice President Gore announces a plan to tear down public housing, saying these crime-infested monuments to a failed policy are killing the neighborhoods around them. He reminds his listeners in the years past, Washington told people around the country what to do, dictating wisdom from on high. And let's be honest, some of that wisdom really wasn't very wise. And then he announces a plan to build new public housing projects.
I think a lot of this reinventing government initiative of the Clinton administration shows a sort of disconnect between understanding that the current government structures have failed and then basically rebuilding them, recapitulating them. Public housing has failed, so let's build more public housing. I think it's a real unwillingness to face the fact that coercive intervention in people's lives doesn't work as well as markets do. If we had freer markets, we'd have better housing for the rich and for the poor. You know, the way poor people get housing in a capitalist economy generally is they get used housing that rich people built, lived in for a while, and pass it on. And that's not, you know, used clothes maybe are getting a little threadbare. That's not usually true with used housing. You'll see ads in New York City advertising pre-war construction, and what they're saying is those buildings were built so well because they were built for wealthy people that they're still better today than a lot of newer housing. So let the free market work, you'd get better housing than the Housing and Urban Development is going to build.
Is there any regular columnist in any newspaper that is a libertarian?
Well, it's difficult to say exactly what a libertarian is a lot of times. People have libertarian attitudes on a lot of things. In America, almost nobody is totally unlibertarian. I think Stephen Chapman, whose column appears in the Chicago Tribune, the Washington Times, and a lot of other newspapers around the country, I'd call a libertarian. I'm sure that there are a few others that haven't sprung to mind right away.
Is there anybody in television that you know that's either a reporter or a commentator that's libertarian?
Well, in general, of course, reporters don't want to have political opinions, and so I'm not sure. There may well be some of them, but they try to keep it to themselves. As far as television commentators, I'm not sure that I think of one right off. I think there are a lot of radio talk show hosts around the country who are libertarians.
The most visible?
Well, I think David Brodnoy in Boston would admit to that. I think Neil Bortz in Atlanta probably would. Gene Burns, who I believe is now in San Francisco. I think those people put out a pretty solid libertarian message from time to time.
Is there a place to go if you want libertarian thought every week?
Well, if you want libertarian thought every week, you could go to the Cato Institute website every day. Other than that, Reason Magazine is a monthly, Liberty Magazine is a bi-monthly. Those are probably the places that you'd be most likely to get it. Although, as I say, if you have a newspaper that has Stephen Chapman's column, it's pretty consistently libertarian.
Who owns Reason Magazine?
It's owned by the Reason Foundation, which is a sort of competitor of the Cato Institute, another libertarian-oriented think tank.
Are there different kinds of people